We now have the official lineups for each night of the first Democratic presidential debates here on MSNBC. Night one is on Wednesday, June 26th. Taking the Miami stage will be Cory Booker, Julian Castro, Bill de Blasio, John Delaney, Tulsi Gabbard, Jay Inslee, Amy Klobuchar, Beto O'Rourke, Tim Ryan, Elizabeth Warren. Second night, Thursday the 27th. Michael Bennet, Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, Kirsten Gillibrand, Kamala Harris, John Hickenlooper, Bernie Sanders, Eric Swalwell, Marianne Williamson, Andrew Lang. And in the lounge, Bette Midler and Dave Chappelle. Kidding about the last two. Our own Jonathan Allen sums up these matchups this way. The opening 2020 Democratic debate double feature is set. Elizabeth Warren versus The Field on the first night. And establishment Joe Biden versus Democratic Socialist Bernie Sanders, plus two more of the top five polling hopefuls and six undercard candidates in the Lord of the Flies closer. The 20 eligible candidates were first divided into two groups on cut-down day yesterday. Those polling an average at or above 2%, those who polled below 2%. A random drawing then took place to create two separate groupings of 10. This morning, the president gave his preview on Fox and Friends of how he views his potential Democratic opponents.
Everybody knows that Joe Biden does not have what it takes. Okay, he doesn't have what it takes. Everybody knows.
What does that mean?
It means mental capacity. It means a lot of different things. He never did have what it takes until Obama he ran 2 or 3 times. I used to call him 1% Joe because he never got more than 1%. Then Obama came along and surprisingly took him off of, the trash heap and ran. But everybody knows Joe doesn't have it. Now I see that Pocahontas is doing better. I would love to run against her, frankly. I see that Bernie Sanders is not doing well at all. I would have, frankly, liked to have run against. I think it's probably those three. I don't see the other ones.
The Almanac of American Politics, thanks to Fox and Friends. With us to talk about it tonight, Laura Barón-López, national political reporter for Politico. And still with us, we've talked Jonathan Allen into sticking around a few more minutes. Jonathan, I was joking about Dave Chappelle because Jason Johnson said on this network earlier today what we were all thinking. It's like going to a comedy club. You're there for Chappelle. You kind of know he's going to bat cleanup at the end of the evening. Sometimes that means sitting through a lot of aggressively bad stand-up. So with that in mind, John, what do you make of these two groupings? And why did I hear you today talking about how you're going to be watching Beto O'Rourke, of all people?
Well, I think that let me start with the Beto O'Rourke question. I mean, Beto O'Rourke, his polling has suffered and fallen to the point basically in a lot of these polls at 2%, 3%, 4%, where he really has to have a breakout moment in one of these debates or you're going to see all of his fundraising dry up. This is somebody who's gotten a ton of media attention, somebody who has gotten a ton of resources to run his campaign and really hasn't lived up to it in terms of the polling. He's somebody we've seen get much more aggressive in the last couple of days. We saw him in a Morning Joe interview this past week really go after the former Vice President Joe Biden aggressively. I think he knows it. He's got to have this kind of breakout time. He'll be on the stage with Elizabeth Warren in that first night debate and several of the other 8 other candidates. And I think this is his opportunity to really make something of himself, reintroduce himself on the national stage. But the truth is, all of these candidates, this is the first big opportunity. And for anybody who isn't one of those top 5 candidates, and that's Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, and Kamala Harris, in whichever order you want to put them, anybody who's not in that top 5, you're basically a margin of error candidate, meaning that you're polling within the margin of error of 0. And as one Democratic strategist put it to me today, if you're in the margin of error, you have no margin for error.
Laura, let's continue to speak English here. Bill de Blasio can't get quoted in New York. You're under so much pressure to have a moment and say something that makes you stand out. If you're Jay Inslee or Michael Bennet or anyone at that level, how on earth do you prepare for this evening, and how do you keep it from going over the edge and being remembered for all the wrong reasons on your way out the door?
Well, if you're someone like Jay Inslee, I think he's going to try to create as much contrast as he can between himself and who he shares the stage with, specifically around climate change. That's an issue that he's been trying to own, and no one's plan goes as far as his to date. And so he will be able to own that issue. I think it's similar with other candidates, that if they can carve out a lane for themselves, either on a specific policy issue, that may be where they can shine. I want to talk about Warren a little bit because, yes, the next person on the stage is Beto, that maybe has the chance to go toe-to-toe with her a bit. Initially, this looks as though she drew the short straw, but I think that this gives her an opportunity to just shine and unopposed and kind of own the stage. And she will have plenty of opportunity after this to go head-to-head with Bernie and to go head-to-head with Biden.
And, John, to the elephant in the room, to the elephant in the field, if you're Biden, if you know it's going to be an evening of incoming when you take the stage, how do you prep? How do you gird for that? How do you future-proof your campaign and your presentation?
I mean, the big thing for Joe Biden is to not falter. Right now, he's still riding a wave of wide approval, great name recognition, and to get out there and show people that he can still perform at the level that he did as vice president. You heard the president of the United States attack him and say that essentially that he's not still all there. All he has to do is go out on stage and perform reasonably well. I think if it would be likely that his advisors are telling him shorter answers are better ones, like your producer probably would like me to do.
Oh, stop that right now. We've never had that complaint. You're one of our best behaved guests. So, Laura, in the jet fighter business, when they do flyovers, if it's a memorial, they talk about the missing man formation. The missing man formation on these two nights is going to be Donald Trump in a way that looms all over the conversation. He will obviously be the control group that dominates this conversation. Talk about that aspect of these two nights.
Right. So I think in the second night, the one that has the majority of the frontrunners, Biden, Bernie, Buttigieg, Harris, it's going to be difficult for Biden, I think, to keep that narrative going that he has tried to since he launched his campaign, which is this is between him and Trump. And he hasn't really paid that much attention to the rest of the field. He's tried to avoid creating contrast between himself and them as much as possible. And so now that he's going against Bernie and Buttigieg, who are going to take as many shots, I think, as they possibly can at him, it's going to be difficult for him to continue saying that this is about him and Trump. On the other hand, in the other debate, I think Warren and Beto could have more space to do that, to take more direct shots at the president.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.